Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Borderlands. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The wagon train emerged from the dense forest in late September of 1853, traveling along what locals called the Old Wire Road to the scattered homesteaders of Madison County in the remote Ozark Borderlands. The arrival of any new settlers was caused for notice, but the 12 wagons that creaked to a halt near the banks of the White River that autumn day drew particular attention. At their head rode a tall, austere figure with piercing eyes and a beard that reached nearly to his waist. This was Elijah Harlan, a man whose name would eventually be methodically erased from every church record in the region. According to documents discovered in 1964 in the basement of the Huntsville courthouse, Elijah Harlan had led his extended family, 37 people in total, from eastern Tennessee through the Cumberland Gap and across Missouri. Their arrival in what is now Madison County, Arkansas, went largely unrecorded in official records. Only through fragments of letters, journal entries, and oral histories passed down through generations would the full story of the Harlan sect eventually surface. And even then, many details would remain buried, perhaps deliberately. What made the Harlan family's arrival particularly noteworthy wasn't their number, but rather the strange silence that seemed to emanate from their wagons. No children called out, no casual conversation between the men and women. According to an account written by Thomas Brewer, whose homestead sat just 3 miles from where the Harlans eventually settled, they moved as one body with barely a word spoken between them. The elder Harlan would raise his hand and they all would stop. He would lower it and they would continue. I never heard such perfect silence from so many souls. Within weeks, the Harlanshad established their compound on a secluded 200-acre parcel of land nestled against the Boston Mountains. The property featured a natural spring and several caves that dotted the limestone ridges above. They built their settlement quickly with a precision that suggested they had rehearsed their tasks well before arrival. The main house, a sprawling 2-story log structure, was completed before the first frost. Surrounding it were 7 smaller cabins arranged in a perfect half-circle facing east. Beyond these stood a larger building with no windows that locals would later refer to simply as the Gathering House. The first winter passed without incident. The Harlans kept to themselves, emerging from their compound only for essential supplies or occasional trade. What little interaction they had with neighboring settlers was formal and brief. Elijah Harlan conducted all business transactions personally, while the rest of his family, men, women, and the few adolescents among them, maintained a peculiar silence, their eyes downcast, their expressions uniformly blank. Sarah Jenkins, who ran the general store in Huntsville at the time, kept meticulous records of all transactions. Burr ledger preserved in the County Historical Society archives contains several notations regarding the Harlan family. February 3, 1854, Elijah Harlan purchased 50 lbs of flour, 20 lb of salt, various sundries, brought 3 men with him who spoke not a word. All wore identical dark coats despite the bitter cold. No hats, hair cropped identically short except for Harlan himself, whose beard now reaches below his chest. Payment made in precise coins, counted exactly, left immediately upon completion of transaction. By spring, locals had begun to refer to the Harlan property as the Silent Hill, a name that reflected both its geographical position and the unnerving quiet that seemed to emanate from it. Even at a distance, travelers passing along the Old Wire Road reported an unusual absence of normal sounds from the settlement. No shouting of children, no livestock noises, no singing or conversation, just silence, occasionally broken by what one traveler described as a low rhythmic chanting that carried across the valley at dusk. The first real interaction between the Harlans and the broader community came in April of 1854, when Elijah Harlan appeared at the small Baptist church in Huntsville one Sunday morning. His arrival caused an immediate stir. He came alone, dressed in a black coat that reached his ankles, his long beard neatly combed. His eyes, described by multiple witnesses as unnaturally pale blue, surveying the congregation with an intensity that many found unsettling. Reverend William Holloway, who led the service that day, later wrote in his personal journal, "The stranger sat in the back pew perfectly still throughout the entire service. He did not join in hymns or responsive readings. When approached after the service, he introduced himself as Elijah Harlan, speaking in a voice both soft and commanding. He expressed interest in our congregation, but declined my invitation to bring his family the following Sunday, stating only that their worship takes another form." When pressed, he spoke of a higher covenant that his family observed, one that required particular devotions at specific times. He occasionally engaged Reverend Holloway in theological discussions after services, conversations that the Reverend later described as deeply unsettling in their intensity and unorthodox interpretations. In one such conversation recorded in Holloway's journal dated June 1854, Harlan reportedly expounded on his belief that the second coming was imminent, but would be recognized only by those who had properly prepared their vessels. When asked to elaborate, Harlan spoke of a process of emptying and filling that would make the faithful ready to receive fragments of divinity. Holloway noted that Harlan's interpretations of Scripture were learned but alarming in their deviation from accepted doctrine. It was during this period that the first disappearance occurred. His manner was courteous but allowed no further inquiry. Over the next several months, Elijah Harlan attended church services sporadically, always alone, always silent, except when directly addressed. Margaret Wilson, a widow who lived alone in a small cabin approximately 3 miles from the Harlan property, vanished without explanation in July of 1854. Her home was found undisturbed with bread still rising in a bowl on her table and her walking stick leaning against the door, suggesting she had not planned to go far. A search party organized by Sheriff Thomas Ledbetter found no trace of her. In his official report, later discovered in county archives in 1965, Ledbetter noted that the only unusual circumstance was the discovery of strange markings carved into the tree surrounding Wilson's property, vertical lines intersected by circles. These marks appear to have been made recently with a sharp implement. Their purpose or meaning remains unknown. The disappearance caused concern but not alarm. In the frontier conditions of the Ozarks in the 1850s, accidents and sudden departures were not uncommon. Some speculated that Wilson might have fallen into one of the numerous sinkholes that dotted the limestone landscape. Others suggested she might have decided to join relatives in Missouri without informing neighbors. Only in retrospect would her disappearance take on a more sinister aspect. Throughout the summer and early autumn of 1854, locals began to report other unusual occurrences in the vicinity of the Harlan property. Hunters claimed to have observed figures in gray clothing, standing motionless among the trees at dusk. Travelers on the Old Wire Road spoke of hearing strange chanting carried on the wind. One farmer reported that his dogs refused to approach the boundaries of the Harlan land, instead crouching and whimpering when brought within a quarter-mile of the property line. Most disturbing were the reports from a local trapper named Joseph Creed, who claimed to have observed a nighttime gathering on the Harlan property in late August. According to Creed's account, given to Sheriff Ledbetter but not formally recorded, he had been checking his trap lines after dark when he observed lights in a clearing near the Harlan compound. Concealing himself in the underbrush, he witnessed what he described as 30 or more people arranged in circles, all wearing gray clothing, moving slowly around a central platform where Harlan stood holding something aloft. The people moved in perfect unison like clockwork figures while Harlan chanted in a language I couldn't recognize. Creed claimed that as he watched one person from the inner circle collapsed to the ground, whereupon 4 others carried the fallen figure toward one of the caves in the limestone ridge. The ceremony continued until dawn, at which point Creed fled, fearing discovery. When questioned further, Creed admitted to having consumed a considerable quantity of corn whisked earlier that evening, which led Sheriff Ledbetter to discount much of his testimony. The second disappearance occurred in November. James Cornell, the 19-year-old son of the general store owner, vanished while hunting in the forests north of Huntsville. His rifle was found leaning against a tree, but no other trace of him was discovered despite an extensive search. Like the Wilson property, trees near where Cornell's rifle was found bore the same strange markings, vertical lines intersected by circles. A third disappearance followed in January 1855 when a circuit-riding doctor named Samuel Harris failed to return from a call to treat a patient near the Harlan property. His horse was found wandering riderless 2 days later, his medical bag still attached to the saddle. Again, the same markings were found carved into trees near where the horse was discovered. By this point, suspicion had begun to fall on the Harlan family, though no direct evidence linked them to the disappearances. Sheriff Ledbetter paid an official visit to the Harlan compound in late January 1855, but found nothing overtly suspicious. In his report, he noted the unusual layout of the settlement, the identical gray clothing worn by all family members except Elijah, and the unnerving silence that pervaded the compound. He interviewed Elijah Harlan regarding the disappearances, but came away with nouseful information. The elder Harlan received me courteously, but with obvious reluctance, Ledbetter wrote, when questioned about the strange markings found near each disappearance site, he claimed ignorance but remarked that signs appear to those who need guidance. I found no legal grounds to press the matter further, though I left with a distinct unease that I cannot properly articulate. What we know about the internal workings of the Harlan sect comes primarily from two sources that would only come to light much later. A journal kept by Sarah Harlan, Elijah's first wife, discovered hidden in a cavity beneath the floorboards of the main house in 1962, and the testimony of Thomas Harlan, Elijah's younger brother, who fled the compound in February of 1855 and sought protection from authorities in Fagerville. He denied any knowledge of the missing persons and declined to allow me to speak with other family members, stating that they were engaged in necessary devotions that could not be interrupted. Sarah Harlan's journal, now preserved in the Arkansas State Archives in Little Rock, reveals a religious ideology that had begun as a splinter from the Baptist faith, but had evolved into something far more sinister under Elijah's leadership. According to her entries, Elijah claimed to have received divine revelation while suffering from a high fever in 1849. This revelation convinced him that the second coming was imminent, but only a select few, those who had been properly cleansed, would be recognized by the returning Christ. Elijah speaks of the cleansing with such conviction, Sarah wrote in an entry dated November 1853, shortly after their arrival in Arkansas. He says our bodies must be emptied of worldly corruption. The process begins with fasting, then proceeds to the drawing out. I cannot bring myself to describe the drawing out on these pages. The sounds they make during it haunt my sleep. Other entries describe how Elijah maintained control over the family through a combination of charisma, intimidation, and isolation. Members were forbidden from speaking to outsiders without his permission. Food was strictly rationed and distributed only after lengthy prayer sessions. Sleep deprivation was apparently common, with night vigils often lasting until dawn. We sleep only when Elijah permits it. Sarah wrote in December 1854, sometimes 3 days pass with only brief moments of rest. He says, sleep allows impurity to collect in the vessel of our bodies. When exhaustion overtakes someone during the vigils, Elijah declares it a sign that they are ready for the next stage of cleansing. They are taken to the cave for the drawing out. Some return, some do not. Perhaps most disturbing were Sarah's cryptic references to what she called the vessels, apparently individuals selected by Elijah for special attention. Martha has been chosen as the next vessel, she wrote in January 1855. She weeps at night, but shows no emotion when Elijah announces it to the family. They have taken her to the cave. I hear the singing from there even with my windows closed. By morning she will be empty, and then the filling can begin. The journal becomes increasingly fragmented and incoherent in its later entries, suggesting Sarah's own mental state was deteriorating. The final entry, dated February 15, 1855, reads simply, Elijah has chosen me. I am to be a vessel. God forgive me for what I have witnessed and done nothing to stop. If anyone finds these words, know that we did not understand what we were joining. We believed we were following God's will. We were wrong. Thomas Harlan's testimony provides more explicit details about the sect's practices. According to a transcript preserved in the Washington County Courthouse in Fayetteville, Thomas fled the compound on the night of February 12, 1855, traveling on foot through difficult terrain to reach Fayetteville on February 16th. His appearance caused immediate concern. He was emaciated, his clothing torn, and he exhibited signs of severe psychological distress. After being provided with food and medical attention, Thomas gave a lengthy statement to local authorities. According to this testimony recorded by a county clerk on February 17th, Elijah's theology had developed around the notion that human bodies could serve as vessels for fragments of divinity that Elijah claimed to extract from specific locations in the surrounding wilderness. The process involved rituals that Thomas described as bloodletting and forced fasting until the person was too weak to resist Elijah's will. My brother believes he is preparing vessels for what he calls the divine essence, Thomas stated in his testimony. Identifies certain individuals, both within our family and from the surrounding area, whom he claims have been marked to receive this essence. The preparation is brutal. I fled when my own wife was selected. I could not bear to watch her endure what I had seen others suffer. Thomas described a process that began with isolation in one of the caves where the selected individual would be kept without food, water, or sleep for up to 3 days while the rest of the sect performed continuous chanting outside the cave entrance. Once the person was sufficiently weakened, they would be brought to a stone altar where Elijah would perform what he called the drawing out, a ritual that involved bloodletting from specific points on the body that Elijah claimed corresponded to centers of worldly corruption. Those who survived the drawing out would be kept in isolation for several more days, Thomas continued. When they emerged, they were changed. They no longer spoke unless Elijah directed them to. They moved only when instructed. Their eyes seemed empty, as if something fundamental had been removed from them. Elijah called them emptied vessels, ready to be filled with what he called divine fragments. According to Thomas, the filling ritual involved another ceremony in the caves during which Elijah would produce small objects he claimed to have collected from power points in the surrounding wilderness, typically crystals, unusually shaped stones, or pieces of bone. These objects would be placed in water, which the emptied vessel would then drink. After this ritual, the person became what Elijah termed a filled vessel, a perfect servant who would obey every command without question. Thomas also claimed that his brother maintained detailed records of his theology and practices in what he called the Book of Vessels, allegedly kept locked in a metal box beneath his bed. This book was never recovered. Most disturbing was Thomas's claim that the 3 disappeared locals, Margaret Wilson, James Cornell, and Dr. Samuel Harris, had been abducted by members of the sect under Elijah's direction, specifically because they possessed physical characteristics that Elijah believed made them ideal vessels. According to Thomas, all 3 had been subjected to the emptying ritual. Wilson and Cornell had not survived the process. Harris, however, had allegedly been successfully emptied and filled and was now living among the sect as one of Elijah's most devoted followers. Thomas's testimony was sufficiently alarming that authorities in Fayetteville contacted Sheriff Ledbetter in Huntsville, providing details of Thomas's claims and urging immediate action. Ledbetter assembled a posse of 12 men to investigate the Harlan property, planning to arrive at dawn on February 20th, 1855. What they found was unexpected. The gate stood open and no one challenged their entry. As they approached the main house, they noticed the absolute silence. No livestock sounds, no voices, no activity of any kind. Inside the main house, the hearth was cold. Food remained on the table, apparently abandoned mid-meal. Personal belongings remained in all the cabins. But of the 36 remaining members of the Harlan family, there was no trace. The only building that showed signs of recent activity was the windowless gathering house. According to Sheriff Ledbetter's report, the floor of this building had been removed, revealing a hand-dug pit approximately 8 ft deep. At the bottom of this pit were the remains of a large fire and what appeared to be a stone altar. The walls of the pit were covered with the same markings found near the sites of the disappearances, vertical lines intersected by circles. The most disturbing discovery came when the posse explored the network of caves in the limestone ridge above the property. In the largest of these caves, they found evidence of recent occupation, bedding, food supplies, lanterns, and a collection of strange implements described in the sheriff's report as surgical in nature, though of unusual design. Deeper in the cave system, they discovered a chamber where the walls had been covered with writing, biblical passages interspersed with what appeared to be Elijah Harlan's own revelations. In one small cave, they found what Ledbetter described in his report as evidence of medical procedures having been performed. This included blood-stained blankets, crude surgical tools, and containers of various herbal preparations. A journal found in this cave contained what appeared to be medical notes, possibly written by the missing Dr. Harris, detailing procedures performed on individuals identified only by initials. The descriptions were clinical but disturbing, referring to extraction of corrupted essence and preparation of the vessel through controlled exsanguination. No bodies were found, no blood evidence, no signs of violence beyond the disturbing implements and stained blankets. The entire Harlan family had simply vanished. The investigation that followed raised more questions than it answered. Tracking dogs lost the scent at the edge of the White River, suggesting the family had taken to the water to hide their trail. Searches of neighboring counties yielded no results. A few reports came in of sightings. A group of people in identical gray clothing seen purchasing supplies in Springfield, Missouri. A bearded man matching Elijah's description boarding a steamboat in Memphis, but none were ever verified. Sheriff Ledbetter continued the investigation for several weeks, gradually expanding the search area and interviewing anyone who might have had contact with the Harlan family. Most leads proved fruitless, but one interview yielded particularly disturbing information. Jacob Weber, a farmer whose property adjoined the Harlan to the north, reported that in the weeks before the family's disappearance, he had observed unusual activity at night. "I couldn't sleep well on account of my rheumatism," Weber stated in his testimony, "so I would often sit on my porch at night. 3 or 4 times in early February, I saw lights moving through the forest toward the river. They formed a straight line like people walking single file with lanterns. I counted at least 20 lights one night. They would disappear for hours, then return before dawn, moving back toward the Harlan place. I thought little of it at the time, figured they might be night fishing or some such, but looking back, it seems they were preparing for something. Moving supplies maybe, or preparing a path for their departure. The case might have faded into obscurity had it not been for the events of October 1855. A hunting party in the forest near Eureka Springs, approximately 40 mi from the abandoned Harlan compound, discovered a clearing where 30 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground in a perfect circle. At the center of this circle was a stone platform similar to the altar found in the Gathering House pit. On this platform lay a leather-bound book, the only possession of the Harlan sect ever recovered after their disappearance. This book, which came to be known as the Harlan Testament, contained over 300 pages of densely written text in Elijah Harlan's distinctive handwriting. The contents described his theology in disturbing detail, a complex system of belief centered around the idea that human bodies could be emptied and then filled with what he called fragments of the divine. The process he described involved systematic starvation, sleep deprivation, and bloodletting, followed by the administration of various herbal concoctions that induced hallucinatory states. More disturbing were the detailed records of vessels prepared, a list of names that included not only Harlan family members, but also the names of the 3 local residents who'd disappeared. Next to each name was a date and a location. Some names were marked with a simple X, which appeared to indicate those who had not survived the emptying process. Others were marked with a circle apparently indicating successful vessels. Margaret Wilson and James Cornell both had X's beside their names. Dr. Samuel Harris had a circle. The final entry dated February 19, 1855. The day before the sheriff's posy arrived read simply, "The vessels are ready. The gathering is complete. We move now to the final preparation. The site has been marked. The gateway will open at the appointed time. Those who've been filled will pass through. Those who have not been filled will serve to open the gateway." The Harlan Testament was turned over to state authorities in Little Rock, where it was studied briefly before being locked away. In an unusual move, Governor Elias Conway ordered all documents related to the case sealed in 1856. The official explanation cited concerns for public moral welfare, but some historians suggest the real reason was the document's potential to inspire copycat cults in the religiously volatile atmosphere of the pre-Civil War Ozarks. What happened to the Harlan sect after their disappearance remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the region. No confirmed sighting of Elijah Harlan or any of his followers was ever recorded after February 1855. The three missing locals, Wilson, Cornell, and Harris, were never found alive or dead. The Harlan property remained abandoned, regarded with superstition by locals who claimed it was tainted ground. Eventually, the land was claimed by the state for unpaid taxes and later sold to timber interests. For nearly 70 years, the Harlan sect faded from public memory. The land where their compound stood was logged, then allowed to return to forest. The buildings were dismantled for materials or fell into ruin. Local families avoided the area, claiming it felt wrong or that strange sounds could be heard there at night. But no tangible connection to the Harlans remained, not even in church records, where it appears their names were deliberately removed from membership rolls and baptismal registries throughout the region. This systematic erasure of the Harlan name is perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of the case. Records that should have contained references to Elijah, Harlan's attendance at church services, were altered or destroyed. His name was removed from store ledgers and county tax rolls. It appears that a deliberate effort was made to strike the entire family from official memory, as if by removing their names, the community could somehow erase the disturbing reality of what had occurred in their midst. The case might have remained buried forever had it not been for the chance discovery made by University of Arkansas anthropology professor Dr. Eleanor Weber in 1927. While researching folk religious practices in the Ozarks, Dr. Weber encountered an elderly woman named Mary Collins living in a remote cabin near Huntsville. Collins claimed to be the granddaughter of Sheriff Thomas Ledbetter, who had led the posse to the Harlan compound in 1855. According to Collins, her grandfather had kept a private journal detailing his ongoing investigation of the Harlan case, an investigation he continued unofficially for years after authorities had abandoned it. This journal, which Collins turned over to Dr. Weber, contained information never included in official reports. Most significantly, Ledbetter claimed to have tracked the Harlan sect to a remote location in the Boston Mountains near the Oklahoma border. There, in the autumn of 1857, he allegedly observed from a distance as the remaining members of the sect performed a ritual around a large fire. According to his description, Elijah Harlan stood on a platform, directing the others as they moved in concentric circles. One by one, individuals would stop moving and collapse to the ground. I watched through my field glass as 23 people fell. Ledbetter wrote, "None arose again. Harlan himself was the last to fall. By dawn, when I dared approach the site, I found no bodies, only ash and 30 wooden stakes driven into the ground in a perfect circle. I believe they are truly gone now, whether be their own hand or through some means I cannot comprehend. I will not speak of this officially. Some knowledge serves no purpose but to disturb the peace of the living." Ledbetter's journal, also, contained a detailed map showing the location of this final ritual site, along with sketches of the markings he found there. The same vertical lines intersected by circles that had been associated with the sect from the beginning. Most disturbing was his description of what he found at the center of the circle of stakes. A stone platform much like the altar found in their gathering house, but larger. Upon it lay 30 small cloth bundles, each containing what appeared to be human teeth and finger bones. At the center of these bundles was a glass vial containing a dark liquid. I did not touch it. I re-aeried everything as I found it, and marked the location with a car of stones that I might know it again if needed. Dr. Weber published her findings in a limited academic journal in 1930, but her work attracted little attention outside scholarly circles. The original Ledbetter journal was donated to the University of Arkansas archives, where it remained largely forgotten until 1962, when a comprehensive digitization project brought it to light again. This renewed attention coincided with the discovery of Sarah Harlan's hidden journal during the demolition of the last standing structure on the original Harlan property. Together, these documents sparked a brief revival of interest in the case among historians of American religious movements. Several articles appeared in academic publications between 1963 and 1968, and a dissertation on the Harlan sect was completed at Vanderbilt University in 1967. The most thorough investigation came from historian Dr. James Thornton who spent 3 years tracking down descendants of families who had lived near the Harlan compound. Through oral histories and family documents, Thornton pieced together a more complete picture of the sect's brief but disturbing presence in the region. According to Thornton's research published in the Journal of American Religious History in 1968, the Harlan sect represented a unique amalgamation of Baptist theology, folk practices common to the Ozark region, and elements that appeared to derive from Elijah Harlan's own fevered imagination. The result was a belief system that promised transcendence through suffering and emptying of the self. Thornton also uncovered evidence suggesting that Elijah Harlan had a history of religious extremism before arriving in Arkansas. Records from eastern Tennessee indicated that he had been expelled from at least 2 Baptist congregations for heretical teachings and disturbing practices. One church record from 1851 referred to him as having an unhealthy fixation on the purification of the body through bloodletting and noted that he had been forbidden from leading prayer meetings after several participants reported feeling unnaturally compelled by his rhetoric. Perhaps most disturbing was Thornton's discovery that the Harlan sect might not have ended with the events of 1855-1857. Through census records and local church registries, he identified several families who settled in remote areas of Oklahoma and Missouri in the 1860s and 70s, with surnames matching those of Harlan sect members. These families exhibited similar patterns of isolation and unusual religious practices. In one case, a family named Garretson, a surname that appeared among Harlan's followers, established a small homestead near Tahlequah, Oklahoma in 1862. Local records indicate that members of this family were known for wearing identical gray clothing and for their reluctance to interact with neighbors. The family patriarch, identified only as Elder John in church records, was described as a tall man with a long beard who spoke often of vessels and cleansing. The Garretson family disappeared suddenly in 1868, leaving their property abandoned, much as the Harlans had done. No investigation was conducted, and no records exist of where they might have gone. However, a local newspaper article from 1868 reported the discovery of strange markings on trees near the Garretson property described as vertical lines intersected by circles. Similar patterns emerged in Thornton's research regarding families named Bricker and Walcott, both surnames associated with the original Harlan sect. These families appeared briefly in remote communities, lived in isolation, and eventually vanished without explanation. In each case, the period of their residence was approximately 4 to 5 years, roughly the same amount of time the Harlan sect had existed in Madison County. The implications of Thornton's research were disturbing. The Harlan sect might not have died out, but rather fragmented and continued its practices in scattered, isolated pockets throughout the Ozark region for decades after the original disappearance. If this were true, how many people had fallen victim to their practices over the years? And could descendants of these sects still exist, continuing their rituals in the remote corners of the Ozarks? Dr. Thornton's research came to an abrupt end in October 1968. While exploring a remote area of the Boston Mountains, where he believed a splinter group of the Harlan sect might have settled in the 1870s, Thornton disappeared. His vehicle was found parked at a trailhead, his research materials neatly organized inside. A search of the surrounding forest revealed no trace of him. The case remains officially unsolved. Following Thornton's disappearance, academic interest in the Harlan sect waned dramatically. The few scholars who had been studying the case distanced themselves from the subject. The Arkansas Historical Society, which had been planning a comprehensive publication on unusual religious movements in the Ozarks, removed all mention of the Harlan sect from their manuscript before publication in 1969. Most telling was the decision by the University of Arkansas Archives to restrict access to all materials related to the Harlan case, including Dr. Weber's research, the Lead Better Journal, and Thornton's collected papers. These restrictions remained in place until 1995, when changes in archival policy finally made the documents available to researchers again. By then, however, much of the physical evidence had been lost or destroyed. Sarah Harlan's journal, which had been stored in the Arkansas State Archives, was reported missing during an inventory in 1972. The original Harlan Testament, long held in a special collections vault in Little Rock, was severely damaged in asteroid facility flood in 1977, rendering much of the text illegible. Even the land where the Harlan compound once stood had been transformed. First by timber harvesting, then by the creation of Beaver Lake in the 1960s, which submerged portions of the original property. One piece of evidence that did survive was a collection of photographs taken during the initial investigation of the abandoned Harlan compound in February 1855. These images captured using the then-new daguerreotype process show the layout of the settlement, the interior of the gathering house with its excavated floor, and several of the caves where the sex rituals reportedly took place. Most disturbing is a series of images documenting the markings found on the cave walls, biblical passages interspersed with what appear to be Elijah Harlan's own writings. One particularly clear image shows a passage written in a flowing script. The vessel must be emptied before it can be filled. Pain is the chisel that carves away impurity. Blood is the carrier of corruption. When the blood is drawn out in the proper manner from the proper points, the vessel begins to empty. The empty vessel calls to the divine fragments. They recognize their home and enter willingly. Thus is the vessel filled. Thus is the transformation achieved. Another photograph shows the stone altar found in the main cave with what appears to be channels carved into its surface leading to collection basins at each corner. According to the accompanying notes, these channels were stained with a substance consistent with dried blood. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Harlan case is the way it has persisted in the oral tradition of the Ozarks long after most official records were lost or suppressed. In certain remote communities, parents still warn children not to wander too far into the woods with the caution that the gatherers might take you. Some elderly residents of Madison County refuse to discuss the Harlan name, changing the subject immediately when it arises. Local folklore contains numerous references to the Circle People, figures in gray clothing who allegedly appear at dusk in remote areas, moving in perfect unison around a central figure. Hunters and hikers in the Boston Mountains occasionally report finding trees marked with vertical lines intersected by circles, though no official investigation of these claims has been conducted. In 2005, a team of anthropologists from the University of Missouri attempted to launch a comprehensive study of the Harlan sectas, part of a broader examination of fringe religious movements in pre-Civil War America. Their research proposal was denied funding. According to internal documents later obtained through a Freedom of Information request, the review committee cited serious concerns about the potential psychological impact on researchers immersed in this particular subject matter. The most recent development in the Harlan case came in 2012 when a construction crew excavating for a new housing development near Eureka Springs uncovered a sealed metal box buried approximately 6 ft below the surface. Inside was a leather-bound journal dating to 1873. The journal belonged to a man who identified himself only as a vessel of the gathering. The contents of this journal have never been made public. According to county records, the box and its contents were transferred to federal authorities within hours of its discovery. The official explanation cited concerns about potential biological contamination. The pages reportedly contained unusual stains on residues. However, one member of the construction crew who viewed the journal before authorities arrived described seeing page after page of the same phrase written over and over, empty and ready for filling. Whether this journal represents evidence of the Harlan sex continuation into the 1870s or merely the ravings of an unrelated individual remains unknown. Federal authorities have declined all requests for information about the artifact or its current whereabouts. Further intrigue surrounding the Harlan sect emerged in 2015 when a doctoral student in religious studies at the University of Arkansas, Melissa Carver, began researching what she called echo patterns of the Harlan theology in contemporary fringe religious movements. According to Carver's preliminary findings, elements of Elijah Harlan's belief system, particularly the concepts of emptying and filling human vessels, have appeared in at least 3 small religious groups that formed in the Ozark region between 1950 and 2000. It's not clear whether these are cases of direct lineage or simply parallel development. Carver wrote in a research proposal submitted to the university's ethics committee, but the similarities are striking enough to warrant investigation. All three groups maintained isolation from mainstream society, practiced forms of bloodletting as purification, and described a process of preparing vessels for some form of spiritual transformation. Carver's research was halted abruptly when the Ethics Committee denied approval, citing unacceptable risks to the researcher and potential subjects. Shortly thereafter, Carver withdrew from the university program entirely. Attempts to contact her for comment have been unsuccessful. In 2017, an archivist at the Missouri State Historical Society discovered a previously uncatalogued collection of papers belonging to Sheriff Thomas Ledbetter. Among these papers was a sealed envelope marked to be opened only after my death, T. Ledbetter, 1879. The envelope contained a single page of cramped handwriting, apparently a final confession or statement from Ledbetter regarding the Harlan case. I have carried this knowledge alone for 22 years, the document begins. Now, as I feel my life drawing to its close, I must set down the full truth of what I witnessed in the autumn of 1857 when I tracked the Harlan sect to their final gathering place in the Boston Mountains. What follows is a more detailed account of the ritual Ledbetter claimed to have witnessed, substantially expanding on the brief description in his private journal discovered by Dr. Weber in 1927. According to this account, Ledbetter observed the ritual from a concealed position approximately 100 yards from the clearing where it took place. They arrived at dusk 31 figures in gray moving in single file. Ledbetter wrote, "At their head walked Elijah Harlan, now stooped with age but still commanding in his bearing. They formed 3 concentric circles around a stone platform that had been erected in the center of the clearing. On this platform stood a large metal vessel resembling a cauldron." Ledbetter described how Harlan addressed the gathered followers in a language he could not understand, gesturing frequently toward the sky. As night fell, the followers began to move slowly around the platform, maintaining their circular formation. Harlan remained at the center, continuing his oration. As midnight approached, Harlan produced a knife and cut his own palm, allowing the blood to drip into the cauldron. The account continues. Each follower then approached in turn to do the same. When all had contributed their blood, Harlan added various powders and liquids from containers he carried. He then set the contents alight, producing a flame that Ledbetter described as supernaturally blue and casting no shadow. What happened next defies rational explanation, at least according to Ledbetter's account. He claimed that as the flames rose higher, the followers began to collapse one by one, not as if struck down, but as if surrendering voluntarily to some invisible force. Each body upon falling seemed to sink partially into the ground, as if the earth itself were consuming them. Harlan was the last to fall, collapsing onto the stone platform beside the burning cauldron. By dawn, when Ledbetter approached the site, he found no bodies, only indentations in the soil where each person had fallen. The cauldron was empty, the fire extinguished. 30 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground in a perfect circle around the platform. I know not whether what I witnessed was a mass suicide through some poison in the cauldron or something beyond my comprehension. Ledbetter concluded, "I know only that 31 people entered that clearing and none left it by any means I could discern. I have told no one the full details of what I saw that night. Some burdens are too heavy to share." The Missouri State Historical Society has authenticated the document as being in Ledbetter's handwriting and dating from the period indicated. However, historians remain divided on how to interpret its contents. Some suggest that Ledbetter writing more than 20 years after the events may have embellished or distorted his memories. Others point out that Ledbetter was known as a meticulous and reliable witness in his professional capacity as sheriff. What cannot be disputed is that the Harlan sect vanished from recorded history after 1857, with only scattered and questionable evidence of splinter groups or continuations appearing in subsequent decades. The original compound in Madison County remained abandoned, gradually reclaimed by the forest, until the construction of Beaver Lake in the 1960s submerged much of the site forever. The caves, where the sect allegedly performed their rituals, have suffered a similar fate. Some collapsed naturally over time. Others were deliberately sealed by the Army Corps of Engineers during the lake construction, deemed hazardous due to instability. According to local legend, workers who entered the caves reported feeling unnaturally cold and hearing whispering voices. One worker allegedly refused to return to the site after discovering fresh markings on the cave walls, vertical lines intersected by circles. Today, the exact location of the Harlan compound lies approximately 20 ft beneath the surface of Beaver Lake. Occasionally, when water levels are particularly low during drought years, the tops of the limestone ridges where the caves were located emerge from the water as small islands. Local bores avoid these formations, claiming they feel wrong or that electronic equipment malfunctions in their vicinity. In 2019, a team from the University of Arkansas Archaeological Survey conducted a limited sonar mapping of the lake bed in the vicinity of the former Harlan property. Their findings, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, identified several structural foundations consistent with the layout described in historical accounts. More intriguing was the discovery of what appeared to be an extensive network of tunnels connecting the cave systems, tunnels that did not appear on any geological survey conducted before the lake's creation. These passages appear to be artificial rather than natural formations, the report stated. The purpose of such an elaborate underground network remains unclear, particularly given the relatively brief period of the Harlan Sect's known occupation of the site. Limited dive explorations of these tunnels were attempted in 2020, but abandoned after equipment failures and what the dive team leader described as unusual currents and visibility issues. One diver reported seeing markings on the tunnel walls that seemed to glow faintly, though no photographic evidence was obtained due to camera malfunctions. Their regular dimensions and rectilinear patterns suggest deliberate construction which would have required substantial labor over an extended period. The story of the Harlan family sect remains fragmentary, airy pieces of a disturbing puzzle that may never be fully assembled. What we know with certainty is that in the autumn of 1853, 37 people established a compound in the remote Ozark Borderlands under the leadership of a charismatic religious figure named Elijah Harlan. By the spring of 1855, they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind evidence of disturbing rituals and a theology centered around emptying and filling human vessels. What became of them? Did they, as Sheriff Ledbetter's private confession suggests, enact some final ritual of mass suicide in the forests near the Oklahoma border? Did they fragment into smaller groups that continued their practices in isolation for decades afterward? Or did they simply disperse, abandoning their beliefs and disappearing into the general population of the expanding American West? Perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that descendants of the Harlan sect continue to exist, carrying forward Elijah's disturbing theology in remote corners of the Ozark wilderness. If Sheriff Ledbetter's account is accurate, and the ritual he witnessed in 1857 claimed 31 lives, this would account for only some of the original sect members. What became of the others? And what beliefs did they pass to their children? The systematic erasure of the Harlan name from church records throughout the region suggests a deliberate effort to forget, as if by removing their names from official documents, the community could somehow erase the disturbing reality of what had occurred in their midst. But sous-chefs at forgetting often serve only to transform history into legend and legend into something more persistent and pervasive. A quiet fear that shapes behavior and lingers in the collective unconscious of a region. Even today, certain areas of the Boston Mountains remain largely unexplored. Remote hollows and ridges where few people venture. Local guides refuse to lead expeditions to these locations, citing vague concerns about bad air or unstable ground. But their eyes tell a different story, one of inherited caution passed down through generations. In 2022, a journalist from a national magazine attempted to research an article on the Harlan sect interviewing elderly residents of Madison County about local legends. Most refused to speak on record. One 93-year-old woman, however, shared a story she claimed to have heard from her grandmother, who had lived near the Harlan property as a child. "Grandma said they wasn't like regular folks," the woman recalled. "Said they moved all together, like they was connected by invisible strings. Said they never spoke above a whisper except for the tall man with the beard he'd preach sometimes at night, and his voice would carry across the valley. Grandma said her daddy forbade any of the children from going near their land. Said if you heard singing coming from that direction, you should go inside and bar your door because it meant they were making another vessel." When asked what she thought had happened to the Harlan sect, the woman fell silent for a long moment before responding. "Grandma always said they didn't leave. said they just went deeper. This cryptic statement echoes a passage from Sarah Harlan's journal, written in the final weeks before the sect's disappearance. Elijah speaks now of a deeper dwelling where the vessels must be taken for the final preparation. He has men working day and night in the caves, expanding passageways, creating chambers. He says, "When the time comes, we will descend into the earth and pull the mountain down behind us, sealing ourselves away until the appointed hour of emergence." No archaeological evidence has been found to confirm the existence of such extensive constructions within the cave systems, though the sonar mapping of the lake bed suggests possibilities that cannot currently be explored. What is certain is that the Harlan sect vanished almost without trace in February 1855, leaving behind only fragments of evidence that hint at disturbing practices and beliefs. In the words of Sarah Harlan, written in the final entry of her journal dated February 18, 1855, just 2 days before the sheriff's posy found the compound abandoned, "What has been emptied can be filled. What has been filled can never truly die. Thavesels will continue their purpose with or without us to guide them. The gathering does not end. It merely changes form. The Harlan family sect has been erased from church records and largely forgotten by history. But in the remote corners of the Ozark Borderlands, where the forests grow thick and the hollows run deep, their legacy persists. Not as historical fact, but as something perhaps more enduring, a whispered warning, a lingering unease, an inherited caution that keeps local residents on marked trails and out of certain shadows. For in those shadows, some believe the gathering continues. In 2023, a hiker in a remote section of the Boston Mountains reported finding a tree marked with freshly carved symbols, vertical lines intersected by circles. Attached to the tree was a small cloth pouch containing what appeared to be human teeth. The authorities were notified, but by the time they reached the location, both the markings and the pouch had vanished. Only an indentation in the bark remained, suggesting something had indeed been there. The hiker, who requested anonymity, later claimed to have experienced disturbing dreams in which figures in gray clothing stood in concentric circles around his bed, watching him with empty eyes. After several weeks of these dreams, he relocated to another state. His current whereabouts are unknown. Is this merely the power of suggestion? A mind influenced by local legends interpreting ordinary experiences through the lens of an old horror story? Or is it possible that something of the Harlan sect survives, moving silently through the remote corners of the Ozarks, still seeking vessels to empty and fill? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps, as Sheriff Ledbetter wrote in his final confession, some burdens of knowledge are too heavy to bear, some truths best left buried in the shadows of the past. But as long as the forests of the Ozarks stand, as long as the limestone caves honeycomb the earth beneath our feet, the question remains, are they truly gone? Or did they, as the old woman's grandmother suggested, simply go deeper? The answer, like the Harlan sect itself, has been erased from official record. But in the whispered stories told around campfires, in the Ozark night, in the hesitation of hikers confronted with unmarked trails, in the collective memory of a region that has learned to fear certain shadows, perhaps the truth persists, not as history, but as warning. For what has been emptied can be filled, and what has been filled can never truly die.